Hosanna, Filio David, Benedictus, qui venit in nomine Domini, Rex Israel, Hosanna in excelsis.
Welcome to Master Tapes and to Sinead O'Connor, singing live for our audience here at the BBC Maida Vale studios. Sinead became a household name in the late 80s. She scored a worldwide hit with her cover of the Prince song Nothing Compares to You. And she gained a reputation as a candid songwriter and an outspoken artist. She's here with us to talk about and play songs from her 2007 album Theology, which she regards as her most personal record. Sinead, welcome to Master Tapes.
Thanks for having me.
Theology, as I say there, is your most personal record, but it's a very different record to a lot of the rest of your output. Yeah. It's very mellow, it's reflective in tone, and it's drawing on almost exclusively religious text. So in that respect, it's a spiritual album, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's the only album I'm taking in the coffin with me. And
you regard it that highly?
I regard it as hopefully it'll get me off all the other awful stuff I ever did. I can go look. I mean, this record. It's a record I really wanted to make since I was a child, genuinely. I was a person who became very musical by the time I was 4. And I had a plan from the time I was about 7 to make this album, specifically to put Old Testament scriptures to music.
To make this up? To make Theology?
It was in my head from the time I was about 7, absolutely. I was an extraordinarily religious person. Not necessarily Catholic. I was living in a Catholic theocracy, but I was luckily the type of child who could see the God beyond that. I didn't soak up any of the negativity of Catholicism, which it was at the time in Ireland, certainly quite negative and dark, and you know, there was nothing joyous about it, but in a way I was able to see through the smoke and flame, and you could see the actual God character. And you would very rarely hear the Old Testament. Around Christmas time you would hear songs like that, or Vinny Emmanuel and stuff. And I was fascinated with the movie Fiddler on the Roof. That came out when I was about 4. I was fascinated with the relationship that the Tevye character had with God. It was very similar to what we were being taught about Jesus. They were two characters who spoke to God the entire time. They were in communication. What I loved about Tevye was he was always complaining to God about stuff. You know, why did you make my horse lame? Why can't I be rich? But we were being told what to think and what to believe, and it all had to be done via the church. But what I liked about Tevye was he was in ordinary situations. He was in a field, he was in his house, he was in his barn talking to God. You didn't have to go to church. He was in the streets. He was everyone in the movie, and all the characters were people who related to God right here. Catholicism in those days taught you had to go via them. You couldn't get absolution unless it was via them. You couldn't talk to God unless it was via Jesus or via the church or whatever. But Tevye kind of shattered all of that, and I liked that as a kid, you know.
Did you consider putting any of the songs from Fiddler of the Roof on reinterpreting them? And I say that because there is a version of an Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice song here from Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yeah,
another great musical of the era.
To be fair, you know, sometimes you make an album, your record company put pressure on you to slip a song on, and that was one of those instances. You know, I
don't know how to love.
Yeah, no, I love the song, but the only problem I had was I wanted it to be an Old Testament record. I wanted it strictly Tanakh, actually, not even Old Testament, but Judaic scriptures, which is where I would be interested in. Obviously, Tevye talks about the good book the whole time. That's what made me want to read the good book. And not only that, but I was living in a country that our people were being oppressed via the good book. So it was important to read this book that's being used to oppress it all. And when I read it and when I listened to Tevye, I discovered that this God person, who I see as a person, isn't what the Theocracy was telling me. It doesn't hate us. It's lost without us. It's crying over the loss of us.
But you can retrospectively look back now and you can describe the island that you grew up in as a theocracy. I mean, officially it's a democracy. But
no,
I mean,
but at the time, no, it
but
was.
But you wouldn't have regarded it as such at the time?
Oh, yes,
as a kid,
I would, absolutely. We all understood it was a theocracy. It was very hard for anyone outside of Ireland in the 60s, 70s, 80s, going back to the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, to understand what type of country it was. It was a fascist-style theocracy, you know, and with a small f, obviously, you know, and I don't mean that as an insult to anybody who dealt with fascism in a big F, but but it was. It was a very frightening place to live, and the world knows now what was happening, for example, to, you know, women who weren't married. You couldn't keep your baby if you were under 18. They were stealing people's babies. They were selling people's babies. They were locking the girls up if they didn't think X, Y, or Z. It's still written in the Constitution, the wording which says a woman's place is in the home. You couldn't work when you got married. That was the way it was. You know, the women had no life, and really, it was a dictatorship. It was a Catholic dictatorship. I think it's very hard for anyone outside to imagine, but it really was a scary place.
Were you God-fearing as a kid, do you think?
No, see, I thought it was a crime to teach people there was anything to fear. I feel that I'm a soul who came in love with God. I was already in love with God before I got here. I'm a person who understood God and could see it through religion. And I grew up in a country where it was not open to me to be a priest. Now, I knew I had a vocation as a child, and in fact, I knew I had such a vocation. I used to pray to God to please not make me want to be a nun, because I knew what that meant, because it was N-O-N-E, you know what I mean? And but I knew I had a vocation, and I was the kind of kid who would set up pretend masses. Instead of sitting there singing with the deodorant, you'd be setting up a fake mass. You'd be a little kid saying mass, but as a girl it wasn't open. But I had a vocation, and the only way I could perhaps express that vocation as a priest rather than a nun was through music. And I clocked the priest when I was little, singing stuff like the song I just sang you and stuff like that, and I thought, oh, that's a road I want to go down. And now, had I been a male, it was open to me to be a priest, I would have become one of the types of priests who creates religious music for the church. That's what I would have done.
But if you'd been born male, then you think you would have...
I would have definitely gone to the priesthood.
Straight away.
Absolutely, without question. By the time I would have left school at 16 and gone straight in to become a priest. You know.
Did you see, when you were conceiving the album, the thought, now is the time to put this set of ideas down in musical form? Did you see that as a way of setting your concept of religion free? It
was my way of owning my priesthood, taking my priesthood. You know, I got to a particular stage in my life and I realised, hold on, I don't have to not be a priest just because I can't do it their way. I can actually be a priest my way. In fact, as you all know, I did go and get ordained, and I was ordained. And so what I did really by getting ordained and generally in life was claim my priesthood, take on my priesthood, and decide, regardless of any of the rules and regulations, that I could do this. I was very inspired by the Rastafarian movement when I came to London at the age of 17. And that linked me back into when I was a kid that made me want to make theology. These were guys, the Rastas, who used music as a priesthood. You know, they're an anti-religious prophetic movement. They're not a religion. They're very into the Old Testament, the books of the prophets. They're a Judeo-Christian movement, you know. But really what I was so impressed about with them, I used to go to Portobello Road. There was a reggae dude there. He used to run a company called the DBC, the Dread Broadcasting Company. And he used to have open mic, you know, and along would come these old men, you know, and they were singing Old Testament scriptures, and you would never hear them in Ireland. They'd make songs out of the scriptures. I learned more scriptures from listening to those dudes on Portobello Road than I ever learned in the 17 years I lived in Ireland.
With a reggae soundtrack.
But what moved me was they were using music as a priesthood, and I suppose that's what happened. Before I made Theology, what I did, I took a break out of the pop world, and I actually made a Rasta record first. I made a before Theology, the stepping stone toward Theology in terms of taking on my priesthood. The first thing I did after actually getting ordained was making a Rasta record, a cover of Rasta tunes.
But most of the songs on the album are drawn from the Old Testament, from religious texts, and then we have I Don't Know How to Love Him from Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yeah.
But also there's another...
It doesn't fit, though. That doesn't fit.
And what about We the People Who Are Darker Than Blue, which is a fantastic Curtis Mayfield song from his debut album just after he's left the Impressions. And you give that a different
I'm
twist.
very glad you asked me that, because to me there's a theology in that song. I was directing it at Catholics. We had been taught to believe that to be a good Catholic, you have to genuinely, this is the way it was, it's hard to believe, but to be a good Catholic, you had to have no self-esteem. The less self-esteem you had, the better person you were in the eyes of God. That's what we were taught. Therefore, be happy for the crumbs from the table. We could identify with the civil rights movement and segregation because, you know, that was being forced on us by a different avenue. There was a mental slavery in Ireland. So to me, that including that song was a way of talking to Catholics. Are we really going to stand around and let what others say come true? Are we crap? Do we deserve nothing but the crumbs from the table? Or are we, in fact, in the eyes of God, precious and beautiful, wonderful people, same as you all sitting here, you know what I mean?
But in a way, I guess, within soul music, Curtis Mayfield is something of a prophet anyway, isn't he?
Yeah, and he was a very religious character. But what I love, I just always, from the time I was tiny, directly, possibly also because I come from child abuse. And as you know, child abuse is one of the worst afflictions of Ireland, you know. And I could identify as a child abuse survivor and also as a Catholic with the civil rights movement. Guys like Muhammad Ali saying, I'm the greatest, way ahead of his time, affirming himself, saying how great he was. We in Ireland were like, oh my God, that's so naughty, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. The same with Curtis and people like that. This declaration that, no, I am beautiful, I am great, I am valuable, I am not before God a piece of dirt on the end of God's shoe, you know what I mean? In fact, I deserve better, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the same applied to each Irish person and therefore to Ireland.
And that sense of beauty and self-esteem that you're talking about there, you set the tone for the album in the opening track, which is Something Beautiful. And you're going to give us a live version of that now.
I deliberately set about making this the first song that I wanted to write on the album because it was a set of prayers, and I wanted to declare to, God, why I wanted to make the record, of what it was I was setting about, I want to make something beautiful for you, and from you to show you I adore you. Oh yeah, and your journey towards me, which I see, and I say, oh, you push through, mad for you, and because...
There's a line in the song about stealing a Bible on a chronic Christmas Eve.
It was Christmas Eve, and I was so big pregnant, and there was a long queue, and I was having a dreadful time. The fact is that his father wasn't around, and I was very upset for the child that his father wasn't going to be. His father had gone AWOL, without leave, and I was very worried for the child, God help me. And I was doing the Christmas shopping, and I desperately wanted a Bible just to help me get through whatever grief I was having around the fact this poor child was going to have his father, which he does now, thank God. But it took 7 years. But there was a long queue. I needed this Bible. I wanted a pocket Bible I could cling to, a long queue. So I nicked it. And I said, look, it should be free, right? I mean, why are we having to pay for it anyway? So I just said, look, okay, if I nick this, I'll do something useful with it, I promise.
Oh, I want to make something so lovely for you, 'cause I promise that's what I do for you. With the Bible I stole, I know you forgave my soul, because such was my need on a chronic Christmas Eve. And I think we're agreed that it should have been free, and you sang to me. They dress the wounds of my poor people as though they're nothing.
It's mixing up scripture and autobiography as well.
There's only 2 songs actually which do that, and that's the one called Out of the Depths, which is partly a psalm, I can't remember what number, and then this one. But the others are every word of them scripture, apart from I Don't Know How to Love Them.
Yeah.
They dress the wounds.
Theology came out in 2007. I think about 3 or 4 years before that, you'd announced that you'd retired from the music business, and you enrolled in a theology class at a Dublin college. Is that where the album was conceived? And I know you say that you'd started thinking about it. You could imagine even as a kid that you would write songs about religion and about your belief. But is that where the album sort of formulated itself?
It was where it became that, okay, I'm definitely going to do this now. And it was that the teacher of the class was this priest. He was a lovely old guy called Wilfred Harrington. And I took specific modules. They were the books of the prophets and also the Holy Spirit. This teacher was fantastic, the old guy, Wilfred. He used to stand there and he'd teach you the book of Jeremiah and the book of Isaiah, but he would be the God character. And for the first time in my life, I saw a person do what I'd been dreaming of since I was a kid, take the person off the page and show the human. And he'd be talking, saying these things that the God character is saying. He'd have tears sitting in his eyes. They would never fall down his face, which I found terribly powerful.
Yeah, why did you refer to the God character there? Why not God?
I like the idea because I think it invites in people who don't necessarily feel comfortable with the G word or comfortable with religion. I mean, the worst thing that ever happened to God or Jesus was religion and Christianity, and certainly people who shove their religious opinions down your throat. That's just so unhelpful. So that's why I like to refer to them as characters, because it means that I allow for the fact that you don't have to believe in this stuff for it to be moving for you.
And in their want, who'll dress their wounds, who'll dress their
Wilfred, he felt such compassion for the God character, and in playing it, he felt the human feelings of the God character. And he took you through the book of Jeremiah, and he showed you that, you know, all the places where priests stand in church and tell you God's angry with you and God this, that, and the other. It's not true. Wilfred played the character of Jeremiah, the God character in Jeremiah, very, very passionately. And the God character there compares himself constantly to a jilted husband, that I've created all these people, they've abandoned me as if a wife. And he goes through the angry feelings that a man might go through if his wife left him. One minute he's really angry, the next minute he's sorry he was angry, the next minute he's pleading, the next minute he's cross again, he wishes he wasn't cross again. He goes through all the gamut of emotions we might go through if we were left by our lover, you know. And that's what you discover, that's what Wilfred was able to embody, that actually this is just a man that loves us so desperately.
So there's something of the Old Testament prophet about him as well, was there?
Ireland was all about drilling the New Testament into you, the Gospels, you know. But had they taught us the Old Testament, we would have understood Jesus and revolted, you know. So they drilled in the Christmas story and everything else. Wilfred came into the class one day, and while I was waiting for class to start on the book of the prophet Isaiah, I was reading the Song of Solomon out of this book, which I wish I'd brought with me, my Old Testament, my Jewish scriptures. But anyway, I'm reading it out of the book, and at this stage I've given up the music business. I'm sick of it, and I'm determined I'm never getting back into it. And Wilfred, the old priest, came in, he saw me reading it, and he banged his finger on it, on the book, and he went, "You should put that to music." And I kind of looked at him like, as if to say, I'm not having anything to do with music ever again. But I think it was so powerful that it was him said it to me, because I loved him so much. You know, it was because he said to me to do it that I went and did it. I probably wouldn't have done it otherwise. I was still that stubborn about not being involved with music. So from the following day, I set about writing the songs, and I set about writing in a completely different way than I had ever written. What I did was I underlined in my book of scriptures everything I liked out of every book I might want to write about, and I wrote then on large pieces of paper in front of me on the floor all the lines I liked, and thought, right, how do I get the essence of each story of each book into 3 minutes and make it rhyme and that kind of thing. So it even changed how I went about writing songs, which is quite powerful. Usually you just write songs inside yourself, you know, you don't look at them on the floor kind of thing, if that makes sense. You know.
So it reignited that interest in music, and you thought, well, actually, I can go back into the
studio. It gave me a sense of purpose. I didn't want to be in a spiritually corrupt arena, which is what the music business is.
And that's why you had effectively retired from the music business, because you wanted nothing to do with...
It didn't suit what I wanted to be. I'd accidentally fallen into the pop star world, and I didn't suit that world. It wasn't my nature, and I was getting quite the kicking for not being a pop star natured person, and I felt really uncomfortable in the business, and it wasn't, as I say, probably from the time I was a kid, really my interest in music was a religious one.
Because some people at the time, even when you were having the big hits, and you know, I said at the beginning of this programme, you gained that reputation for being outspoken. You know, obviously people still think of that moment when you went on Saturday Night Live, a live television show in America, and you ripped up the photograph of the Pope.
Yeah, because I was really letting everyone know who the hell I really am here, you know, and what I really care about.
And that was really early on in your career, in fact, wasn't it? I mean,
well,
what was
1992? Yeah, and unfortunately, we knew in Ireland 10 years before anyone else did, really, what had been going on with regard to children and the church, dreadfully, sadly, and so I understood people's reaction to it. But there are many different levels on which that night was important. Not least, you know, that photograph had been on my mother's bedroom wall for my entire life.
That actual,
you know, I'd grown up in a house of child abuse with this mother looking at me off my mother's walls. This man set foot in our country in 1979. The first hypocritical words out of his mouth were, "Young people of Ireland, I love you." You know what I mean? So, you know, we all knew an awful lot more in Ireland than anybody, unfortunately, knew, you know, outside of there. And then, I realised, oh my God, why is everyone kicking the crap out of me? You know, and I realised, oh, well, it's because you're not being a pop star. You haven't got that personality. So I thought, well, I need to be the personality I really am.
But when you decided to do that, because it must have been a preconceived idea, you'd run through the song in the sound check, and you hadn't done that.
No.
And then when it came to the live transmission, you took out the picture of the Pope, you held it up to the camera, you tore it in half as you were singing the word evil. You must have known that was going to send shockwaves around, I mean, not just through Ireland, but through America as well.
Yeah, I knew that there'd be a kicking, and I knew that there'd be losses, and I knew that there'd be people wouldn't understand and everything, but I could see 15 years down the line.
But the reason I mentioned America, because you were just breaking America there. You were becoming a huge star in it.
I already was, and I wasn't enjoying it.
But there must have been A&R men and record company executives who watched you do that and just thought, oh, no.
Oh,
because, you know.
I still get told, you blew your career and this, that, the other. But I say, look, it's all down to how you define success. To me, I say, before I came into the music business, I had a contract with the Holy Spirit. Before I signed my record contract, I had a contract with the Holy Spirit. There's nothing in my record contract that asked me to renege on the original contract I had with the Holy Spirit, you know. And I am someone, I took my communion even that I made at the age of 8 or 9 extraordinarily seriously. That was a contract between me and the Holy Spirit. And becoming a pop star accidentally was calling me to perhaps compromise that contract and renege on that contract. So I was quite pleased, that everybody was a bit miffed in the music business about it, because it is down to how you define success. Success to me is, do I get to the end of my life having kept my contract with the Holy Spirit? And you believe, therefore, if you have that type of faith, you don't need material things, and you don't need a good name, you don't need to be popular, you don't need to be liked, you don't need everyone to think you're great. You just need to know that you, when you get there, kept true to your word. So it became important to tear things apart, tear apart illusions, tear down the house, tear down this fake image of me as this pop star, let me be who I really am. But more importantly, I think Ireland too, it was something about Ireland, and the fact that it was an Irish female Catholic survivor of child abuse who did that was really important, There was a whole lot of things to be taken down, and as I say, the fact that it was on my mother's bedroom wall is not insignificant.
I mean, it's an incredibly potent act, and you were kind of vilified in sections of the press as well. That must have played a part in that decision to step back from the spotlight as well.
No, it really didn't. No, it really didn't. It was more... It was other aspects of the music business that I found spiritually corrupt, which still go on. We're all getting ripped off. You'd find out, you get forensic accountants in, you find out stuff you really wish you never knew. It's a very materialistic business. It's very manipulative. People can be very manipulative around you. They'll be playing power games around you. You wouldn't even know it, especially when you're too young to know things about money and business and law. It's very corrupt, and everybody wants you to just shut up and don't protest about anything, don't cause any trouble, just shake your tits and twerk or whatever, and not actually, which is all very well, and has its place, but I come from the 70s. The musicians were spiritualized. Do you know what I mean? They were protest singers, and it wasn't protesting for the sake of protest. They were sky rippers, as I call them, and I hope that I'm in the tradition of sky rippers. That people who can unzip the sky, that you see beyond the bullshit, and you see that actually there is something there. There's something there that loves us, that we are part of, that is made out of us, that we are relating to, and we live in my favourite religion, if you want to know, as a matter of interest, is Hindu. And certainly those are the guys I want to see when I'm dying. I don't want to see a guy in a black suit with a white thing telling me everything's going to be miserable.
Why did you become ordained as a priest then? Because
to get in and break the rules, I felt was very important.
From within?
Get in.
Even though you weren't within the mainstream Roman Catholic Church, this was an independent
As a woman, I was experiencing a whole lot of shite on the basis of the fact that I'm a woman, and I don't believe it's true in the eyes of God that I'm less sacred because I'm a woman or less entitled to be a priest. It was an act of revenge and an act of taking over. An act of occupation, of reclaiming something that should belong to the Irish people, should belong to women as much as it belongs to men.
But is vengeance a valid Christian motivation, though?
Yes, vengeance is mine, says the Lord. There are times when it's important to be angry. When it comes to the rape of children, for example, or it comes to the misrepresentation to people of what Jesus or God actually is, because you render people powerless. Those things are worth being angry about, Really, my priesthood to me is about honouring myself as an artist and honouring the fact that I'm someone who believes I got music from the Holy Spirit as an answer to a certain set of prayers, and I promised that Spirit I would do what I could for it when I got bigger, So
Take us back to the music and the music of the album Theology. You're going to play us out of this first part of this edition of Master Tapes with one of the songs from the album. It's adapted from the book of Isaiah. It's called on the album, If You Had a Vineyard.
One of the things that fascinated me in the Old Testament is that there are complete songs composed by the God character. And I came across this song in the book of Isaiah where the God character says to Isaiah, he's talking about war, he's how unhappy he is about the fact that people make war, particularly in the name of religion, and that they're using him in order to kill each other, the God character. He says to Isaiah, let me sing you a song about my vineyard, my beloved and my vineyard. And he refers to two sides in a war. He refers to them as Jerusalem and Judah. Now, in biblical terms, they're supposed to what it really means is the Israelis and the Palestinians. But I could identify with it as an Irish person living in a place where the Republicans and the Loyalists were killing each other. So I also say that in my head, somewhere, the symbolism of Jerusalem and Judah as names for warring sides are also Loyalist and Republican.
Well, we'll continue this conversation in the second part of this edition of Master Tapes, but we leave you with Sinead O'Connor playing live. This is If You Had a Vineyard.
If you had a vineyard on a fruitful hill, and you fenced it and cleared it of all stones until you planted it with the choicest of vine, and you even built a tower and a press to make wine, and you looked that it would bring forth sweet grapes that gave only wild grapes. What would you say, Jerusalem and Judah? You be the judges, I pray. Between me and my vineyard, this is what God says. What more could I have done in it that I did not do in it? Why, when I ask it for sweetness, it brings only bitterness. For the vineyard, my poor people, oh, that my eyes were a fountain of tears. I might wait for my poor people.
Hello and welcome to Master Tapes and to Sinead O'Connor playing live for our audience here at the BBC Maida Vale studios. In the first part of this programme, we discussed how, after massive international success early in her career, Sinead became disenchanted with the music business and how studying religious texts led to the creation of the 2007 album Theology. Now it's the turn of the studio audience to ask some of the questions, and we'll have some more live music from Sinead O'Connor. But before that, seeing as we have a room full of fans here at Maida Vale, Sinead, a word about who you write for primarily, yourself or for other people, do you think?
I think it depends what you're writing. Certainly with Theology, it's God I was talking to, really.
Do you trace your life through the records? Do you ever go back to the earlier records
diaries.
and think this is exactly?
They
are
are
they like
diaries,
musical
yeah.
diaries?
To me, what they are really is the diaries of a person who had been in recovery from child abuse. There was no such thing as therapy in the 70s and 80s in Ireland. There wasn't even cappuccino till 1990. Like, literally, there wasn't. So music was my way of recovery from child abuse. Yeah,
right.
Never.
Okay. Well, let's get our first question from the studio audience. This is from Caroline Bobby. She's a self-employed psychotherapist. She says her ambition is
Meet
to
me
be
later.
a contestant. Sorry,
I said meet me later.
Caroline, where are you?
If you could travel back in time to your 20-year-old self and say one really important thing to her, what would you say to her?
There's a psychotherapist speaking.
Yeah, no, it's a question you actually get asked a lot. It's a great question. I always give the same answer. It revolves around the ripping up the Pope picture and the whole thing.
We should just say in the first part of this programme, you did discuss how in 1992 you ripped up a picture of the Pope on live American
It's not
television.
all around that, but yeah, basically what I would say to myself is I took on board what people said, that I was a terrible person because I wasn't conforming to this, that or the other. I believed everybody, do you understand? So I walked around the world for years thinking I'm a dreadful... I used to ask people all the time, am I bad for this, am I bad for this, I'm a bad person, you know, I really believed it. So if I could say anything, I would tell that person, no, you're not a bad person, you're as good or whatever as anybody else, do you know what I mean?
Did you gain self-esteem through the records as well? I mean, were the songs a way of making sense of what was happening in your life? I mean, right from the outset, right from the first album, and particularly, I guess, on the second album, I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got. I mean, there's a lot of very personal, autobiographical, and apparently very candid songs on
Oh, they were
that
all
album.
autobiographical songs up until Sean Nos Nua, which was the traditional Irish record, you know, and I mean, they are always. Singers are always lying when they tell you something is not autobiographical. And they are autobiographical.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were all... Oh, sorry, I've forgotten the question.
Well, it's just whether it's a way of making sense of what's happening in your life and particularly difficult moments. I'm thinking of a song called Emperor's New Clothes, which has got one of the best opening lines to a pop song, I think, which is seems years since you held the baby while I wrecked the bedroom. I mean, that's like a little, it's a start of a play for today, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I always think of songs as if they're like ropes that people hang on to. It's the same for a writer as it is for a listener. There's a song for every situation in life. It can get you through any situation in life, songs and music. So I don't think it's any different for a writer than it is for a listener. Yeah. You know, it has the same cathartic thing. Gets you through stuff. And as I say, I think it's hugely important in my own career that there was no such thing as therapy in Ireland, and specifically child abuse therapy. Child abuse was such a rife issue in Ireland, but there was no recovering from it. You couldn't talk about it, you know. And Bob Dylan, what I learned from Bob Dylan as a kid was, say, if you take a song like Idiot Wind, it's a dreadful, I mean, very insulting. You wouldn't want to be the person he was talking about or to. What he was teaching really was that music was a safe place. You could say all the stuff you couldn't say anywhere else, whether it was I love you, I hate you, or I'm angry, or I'm happy, or I like sex, or anything, you know, or I'm sad, or, you know, I don't know how to manage life, or whatever. There were rules, certainly in Ireland, as to what could be said and couldn't be said.
And our questioner, Caroline, was talking about being a 20-year-old there. And, you know, you were very young when you started making those records. And
I started writing the songs when I was 14. I mean, I actually made my first record when I was 14.
Yeah,
but certainly I started writing the songs for that first album by the time I was 15.
Yeah. When you're playing the songs on the live stage, you're having to re-inhabit those moments and you take yourself back psychologically to those times. Is that ever difficult if they are so, and as you say, they are so autobiographical?
No, it's not difficult. Well, what's the best way to put it? While I'm singing songs that are about me and that I do emotionally identify with, I'm able to sing them as if it's a character. But I'm also slightly emotionally distanced. That's my job. It's no use to you if I'm going to cry my eyes out in the middle of a song. It's very hard with Christmas songs. You can't sing Christmas songs at all because they make you cry.
But you say about crying your eyes out in song. People will always think about that video for Nothing Compares With You, and which was such a massive worldwide success. And there you were in that video with the tears pouring down your face.
Well, oddly, I think there's one little tear, and I think that tear is...
Well, yeah, it was one tear, actually,
That's what sold the record, I think, that one tear, because so many people felt the same.
And just again, taking us back to the question, to Caroline Bobby's question about being 20 years old, when did you first shave your head? Was it around that time?
It was. I guess I had a bit of a Mohican on the go, and then just before my first record came out, my record company took me aside, God help them, and asked me would I grow my hair and wear reel along and wear like some short skirts and high heels and stuff, and
so you went the other way,
try to look like one of their mistresses basically. And so I went straight from there to the barber. and got him to shave my hair. The poor barber, I'll never forget, a young Greek fella, and he cried after cutting my hair. He didn't want to do it. I had to beg him to do it, and then he actually cried. He was so upset that he had done it, and it was just an awful. In those days, there was no such thing as a girl with a shaved head, so it was a dreadful experience for the poor barber.
Right. But so that was an act of rebellion. That was you saying to those, but also saying to those middle-aged men, "I will not be who you want me to be." I wanted to be me, and I didn't want to be sold on how I looked. I see that if I went at 20 with how I look, then when I'm 70. I'm not going to be able to stand up, never mind twerk. You see what I'm saying? But there's a paradox, isn't there? Because you say that you were determined not to be sold on the way that you look. But of course, when people think Sinead O'Connor, then it becomes the thing with a shaved head.
I suppose what I meant was I didn't want to be sold on being sexy and or pretty, necessarily, or ideas of what were sexy and or pretty.
Let's have another question from the audience here at Maida Vale. This one's from Rory Owens, who's from Northern Ireland. Rory.
You recently criticised Miley Cyrus for using sex to sell records. I was just wondering, are there any current female stars who chart today that are perhaps a positive role model for children?
Well, I guess I don't feel comfortable at singling out names or personalities. What concerns me with a lot of the American artists is that the audiences are minors. I think it's perfectly all right to go around on stage with nothing on and twerk and everything if you want to. That's fine. I don't have any judgment that it's doing it in the presence of minors so that the audience are being sexualised before their natural time and they haven't been asked how they feel about it.
But Rory's talking about
I just wanted to clarify that.
Sure.
I'm trying to think, none of the American artists seem to be wearing clothes at all. It's freaking me out. None of them, not even the middle-aged one. It's really weird. It's like nobody's got any clothes on, but the English, it's only struck me lately, it's only the American one. All the English people are wearing clothes. All the Irish people are wearing clothes. So there's a lot of brilliant women around. I mean, there's fantastic women. Look at Adele, Emily Sandé, brilliant women, Lily Allen. I mean, there's fantastic women around, I'm not a music snob. Like, pop and artists are two different things. An entertainer and an artist, I think, is two different things, but they're both equally valid. But I think you run in trouble when you haven't got some trousers on.
Let's move on and get another question from the audience. In the first part of this edition of Master Tapes, we focused on Sinead's 2007 album, Theology, which took religious texts, including the Psalms and the Old Testament, as lyrical inspiration. And on a similar theme, we have a question from Maggie Scott, who is a massage therapist living in Edinburgh. Maggie.
Hello, Sinead.
Hi.
I'm wondering, I was raised Catholic in exile and English Catholic, and it took a couple of decades to arrive at my own spiritual path, and I discovered Tibetan Buddhism. And Tibetan Buddhism is how I think a Catholic would be a Buddhist, because it's full of wonderful music and ritual and amazing visualizations.
Sure, yeah.
And I'm curious to know, have you an interest in that?
I have had quite a lot of engagement with Tibetan Buddhism. See, again, sometimes the worst thing that can happen to a religion is the people who practice it. And the people often that I've met who practice Buddhism of any kind, they're the type of people who seem to have gone in there to deny emotion. I wanted to box them, oddly. They made me want to box them. And
hang on, we got to throw that back to Maggie.
To me that's amusing. It's amusing.
I understand what you're
funny.
coming from, because I'm a very feelings-based person. That's how I make sense of the world. That's why I love you so much, because you make sense of the world through amazing lyrics. Yeah. I think you've met the wrong Buddhists.
I probably have. I should have gone to Tibet. If I met them in Tibet, they'd be great, but Irish ones, oh God.
I think the Dalai Lama would like to meet you. He would enjoy you.
I hope so. I actually have a friend who managed to annoy the Dalai Lama.
How do you manage How do you manage to do that?
The Dalai Lama got angry with my mate. He's a friend from Nepal, and he used to run a Buddhist monastery. But one day he met the Dalai Lama, and he said to him, the only difference between a monk and a monkey is EY. And the Dalai Lama apparently got really annoyed with me.
Really? The legendary patience cracked.
I know, but I actually do get Tibetan Buddhist music. In fact, I practiced the harmonics singing for quite a long time.
That was what I was wondering when I asked my question. I just can imagine your voice working so well with a lot of the instruments and the chanting.
I believe, if I were to get terribly metaphysical about this, that is what my soul is. That is what this is about on a soul level.
When you say this, you've just lifted up your beanie hat.
I believe my soul is a monk's soul.
Well, that doesn't explain the shaven head, though, does it?
Oh, it does.
Oh, yeah?
She knows what I'm talking about. A monk in disguise.
Well, Sinead, let's have some more live music from the album Theology, the album we're focusing on in this edition of Master Tapes. This is a live performance, a live version of Dark I Am, Yet Lovely.
Okay, I have no guitar. So this is from the Song of Solomon. You gotta excuse my dreadful guitar playing as well, I'm sorry. Dark I am, yet lovely as tents of cedar, as the pavilions of Solomon either. Don't hate me because the sun has darkened me. All my mother's sons were so angry.
We were talking about your very distinctive and characteristic way of singing, where you turn your head away from the microphone. Now, people would think that that's because you're kind of almost limiting the volume, because you have a very powerful voice and your distinctive turn of the head.
Yeah.
And you think that that is something to do with shyness.
I do have a shyness, and one can be afraid of one's own power. And then there's also the head injury aspect. Somebody told me one time that because I had quite a severe head injury when I was a kid, a train came through the station full speed and somebody opened the door and smacked me in the head, you know. So a singing teacher told me that that might be also part of why I'm inclined to go this way when I feel unsafe. And the singing teacher said to me, this is what a body will often do when it's had a severe traumatic injury. The body will suddenly, when you feel uncomfortable, go into the space of safety.
And his flavors. Oh, the king had brought me into his chambers. Say I delight in his love. Say he's the one my soul was.
But the fact that you do that when you're singing suggests that there is an anxiety in performing still, even after all this time.
I think what it is not so much that. I think one can be afraid of the size of one's power. One's spirit can be a whole lot bigger than one's body. You know, I have a massive spirit and a tiny little body. It takes a while to be comfortable and to even feel that it's okay for a female to say such a word as power.
Sure.
Yeah, we have conditioning women of my age. You know what I mean? Is it okay to be powerful? You know?
And then will he see me? Tell him that love isn't done. Tell him don't leave me alone.
Sinead O'Connor singing Dark I Am Yet Lovely from the album Theology, live for our audience here at the Maida Vale Studios. Let's go to another question from the audience. This one's from Nikki Brown, who's a gardener from Tottenham in North London.
This is great. I need a shrink, a massage, and a guitar, and I need someone to do my garden. This is great. Meet me later, all of you.
Nikki.
Those in the mainstream have often found your work shocking because it challenges the establishment. Those less mainstream might find it equally challenging that you choose to base a piece of work on the patriarchal Old Testament prophets. How do you reconcile the two views in yourself?
Then I got to be me. If you start thinking of how other people are going to respond to what you're doing as an artist or a songwriter, if you start editing yourself or your personality or who you are in order to please people, then you're not really being true to yourself. Now, I don't always agree with myself. I disagree vociferously. Do you know what I mean? I annoy myself. I do. I entirely disagree. But as an old therapist I used to go to used to say to me, you're not here to win a popularity contest, you know.
John Nye has our next question. It's about musical influences on the album Theology. John's retired, lives in Longstanton near Cambridge. John, welcome to Master Tapes.
Was Bob Dylan's religious period an influence or inspiration for Theology? And if so, were there any particular songs like Precious Angel that meant more than others?
Very much so, and that's a brilliant question. I think I was about 11 when that record came out. My brother brought it on. It changed my entire life. At the time, my father was absent from my life for a period of years, and in a way, Bob Dylan became for me a father figure, if you like, a role model.
Bob Dylan had become a born-again Christian, and he channeled that through that album, Slow Train Coming.
I think people can often underestimate how much girls need fathering and father figures. You know, you often go, oh, the boy needs a father, but girls does too. And it was brilliant that the father figure that happened to step into my sitting room was Bob Dylan with that record, because it focused me as an artist. Yeah, it was music as a priesthood. The song that affected me most was, of course, the first song on the record, Got to Serve Somebody. Whether you realise it or not, you're serving either the devil or the Lord, you know. And of course, the first lines are about being a rock star. Might be a rock and roll addict prancing on a stage, money and drugs that you command women in a cage. Blah, 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 talking about how to be a musician. He's telling you how to go about being a musician in the music industry, you know. Yeah. I loved Precious Angel as well, obviously. I mean, all of the songs I love. Slow Train Coming is probably the most important album in my life in terms of my formation as a woman and as an artist, yeah.
And this takes us back to the first part of this edition of Master Tapes, where you talked about that incident in 1992 where you ripped up the photograph of the Pope on live television. But it was just a few days afterwards that you appeared at a Bob Dylan tribute concert, and you were introduced by Chris Christopherson, and you walked on stage, and a section of the audience booed you.
Well, they were half cheering and half booing. That was the weirdest thing. It was 50-50.
But there's a kind of a face-off with the audience. If you look back at the video, you just stare at the audience. Yeah. You wait for them to stop, and they don't stop. Yeah. It's almost a kind of a test of nerve.
I understood in that moment why the Rastas called God Dread. And it's the best name for God. It's in the things you fear and dread. And I was having a conversation with God as I was standing there. I was right. The song I'm supposed to sing is a very whispery, quiet vocal. If I sang it, they would have won. I'd have been drowned out.
What was the song? You were going to be doing a Bob Dylan song.
I Believe in You, which is from Slow Train Coming. Had I sang it, I would have got drowned out. And I was like, what do I do? What do I do? And then I thought, scream the Bob Marley song again. To go for the other,
which was War, which was taken from a Haile Selassie speech.
Yeah, which was what I had sang on Saturday Night Live, and it was the cause of it all. So I screamed it, because I wasn't going to be drowned out or shut up.
You've used music in the past, haven't you, throughout your career, as a vent for some of your political feelings and also for your anger as well. And I'm thinking right back to the massive, biggest selling album of your career, I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got, where there's a song there called Black Boys on Mopeds.
Yeah.
Which, just tell us something about the song.
I don't think that was angry, it was sad.
That's a lament.
And I mean, I really believe often that anger is what you would call a fist of tears. It's a handful of tears that someone has locked, and if you open it up, it's actually just tears. That's all anger is.
Yeah, and it is one of the most passionate and visceral songs on that album. It's the album on which Nothing Compares to You appears. And, the biggest... can you play us a version of that song now?
Margaret Thatcher on TV, shocked by the deaths that took place in Beijing.
Two young kids they were 11 and 12, they had nicked their cousin's moped. Now, you couldn't really call it theft. They, in mischief, said, let's have a go on the moped. And at that time, the racial situation in London was a little, fiery.
I said this before now. You said I was childish, and you'll say it now.
The family, obviously, of the two boys became concerned for their safety and called the cops, thinking the cops will help them and keep them safe. In fact, the opposite happened. The cops chased the kids so fast, they crashed the moped and died. And I mean, even now, God forgive me, it makes me want to cry when I think about it.
See, England's not the mythical land of Madame George and roses. It's the home of police who kill black boys on mopeds. And I love my boy, and that's why I'm leaving. I don't want him to be aware that there's any such thing as grieving.
And it was in the area that I lived in, and I had a child the age of these children, these two boys, and I was really, really, it really upset me.
5 a.m. looking for food for her kids. In her arms she holds 3 cold babies, and the first word that they learned was play. would love you. But England's not the mythical land of Madame George and roses. It's the home of police who kill black boys on mopeds. And I love my boy, and that's why I'm leaving. I don't want him to be aware that there's any such thing as grieving.
Black Boys on Mopeds, performed live at Maida Vale for Master Tapes by Sinead O'Connor. A protest song, then. And on a similar theme, our next question comes from Michael Grimes, who's from Northern Ireland and is currently studying in Birmingham. Michael.
Hi, I'm only a student, so I can't really offer you any services like everyone else seems to be today.
You probably could. You probably could, because I'm a bit uneducated.
My question is basically, on social media recently, your presence has been focused on revolution, particularly in Ireland, both like with the water charges and the upcoming of the 100-year anniversary of 1916. Could this political activity possibly manifest into like a new wave Irish trad rebel protest album?
I don't think there's time to sit making albums when people are starving. Certainly revolutions need a soundtrack, and I've definitely been thinking of songs that one might put out quickly as opposed to waiting for an album. But I think the more important job that needs to get done is how do we feed the Irish people, really, because that's what it's down to now. So I'm not messing around when I talk about revolution. I'm very, very serious, so everything else has to go on hold, really.
Revolution, even though you've applied to join Sinn Féin.
Yeah, to me, a new conversation needs to be had. In a way, republicanism needs to be reclaimed. The gentleman there has been talking about an event in Irish history called 1916, which was really when the Irish state was founded. There are a set of instructions, particularly in paragraph 3 and 4 of the proclamation, which was declared at that time, which have not been lived up to. And that's why Ireland is now in the condition it's in. The party that led the 1916 revolt were Sinn Féin, but Sinn Féin later became a party that wasn't at all actually representative of what the original Sinn Féin was. Now, my interest is in bringing Sinn Féin back to what it originally was, but I want to take the matter further. To me, joining the Republican movement is not about anymore that we want a Republic of Ireland or even a country necessarily belongs to England. I'm into talking of the idea of a new country altogether. And there's a long tradition, as you'll know, of Irish artists being very involved in moving things forward for the Irish people. So I'd be a traitor to Irish artistry. It was artists who composed the proclamation of the Irish Republic, you know. So
this is almost like an artistic obligation then, and the way that you live your life.
But it is an artistic obligation, but it's also because I genuinely care about what I'm seeing happen to my people in my country, you know. And I don't have time to sit around writing songs about it. And at first I think there'd be a lot of resistance to the idea of a new country and why it's important to get the Republicans to go talk to the Loyalists about this, you know what I mean? But I am not a stupid woman, and I can see down the line.
And as passionate as ever. That's all we have time for in this edition of Master Tapes, thanks to our audience here at the BBC Maida Vale studios and to our special guest, Sinead O'Connor. Including this one that we're going out with, Sinead O'Connor singing The Healing Room.
You ready? It's like waiting for a new country.
I have a universe inside me, where I can go and spirit guides me. There I can ask, oh, any question. I get the answers if I listen. I have a healing room inside me. They say you have